Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to my series of books I should have read a long time ago, which have been desultorily chosen based on how I feel at the time of picking the books. But, probably should have maybe read them sooner. Anyways, so we are continuing my series on the Arabian Nights, which, as I have said in previous editions, if you are just joining me, which I don't know why you would, because very few people do, but if you happen to be here for the first time, this is number 4 of what is predicted to be 16 volume discussion, review, ramble things on the 1001 Arabian Nights. And this version, as I have said before, this is very much the, in a way, the original English version. The Sir Richard Francis Burton version, which was published in 1885, is a complete unexpurgated version, which, as I have said before, because, this is one of the great entertainments of it, it's written by somebody who in his endnotes periodically goes on, sometimes it's on lengthy diatribes about stuff and things, and sometimes it's about other people's translations that he feels are problematic, and sometimes it's just interesting points of discussion that a footnote in this can have a very, very lengthy side discussion of just all kinds of things. And some of them can be incredibly long. Footnote number 6 on this one, for example. Bin Yusuf al-Sakafi, a statesman and soldier of the 7th and 8th centuries A.D., he was governor of Al-Hijaz and Al-Iraq under the 5th and 6th Umayyads, and I have noticed his vigorous rule of the Muslims' Holy Land in my pilgrimage. He pulled down the Kaaba and restored it to the condition in which it now is, that is 1885. I take a moment out of my reading to note. Al-Siyuti, page 219, accuses him of having suborned a man to murder Ibn Omar with a poisoned javelin and of humiliating the Prophet's companions by, quote, sealing them in the necks and hands, that, unquote. That is, he tied a thong upon the neck of each and sealed the knot with lead. In Iraq he showed himself equally masterful, but an iron hand was required by the revolutionists of Kufa and Basra. He behaved like a good knight in rescuing the Muslim women who called upon his name when taken prisoners by Dahir of Debal. Tata in Sind. Al-Hajjaj was not the kind of man the Caliph would have chosen for a pandar, but the Shias hate him and have given him a lasting bad name. In the East, men respect manly measures, not the hysterical, philanthropic pseudo-humanitarianism of our modern government, which is really the cruelest of all. When Ziyad bin Abihi was sent by Caliph Muawiyah to reform Basora, a den of thieves, he informed the lieges that he intended to rule by the sword and advised all evildoers to quit the city. The people were forbidden under pain of teeth to walk the streets after prayers. On the first night, 200 suffered. On the second, 5, and none afterwards. Compare this with our civilized rule in Egypt, where even bands of brigands, a phenomenon perfectly new and unknown to this century, have started up, where crime has doubled in quantity and quality, and where Christian rule has thoroughly scandalized a Muslim land. This is a footnote, and the footnotes are lengthy, and I can't stop talking about these footnotes. They're fantastic. However, let's talk about these stories, because some of these stories are, they continue to be wild. About after we finished the last story in which we had started with a guy who got kidnapped from his father and never came home, and then he had 2 sons, and the sons got kidnapped from their father, and they never came home, and then they had kids, and those kids, and everybody eventually meets back up with the great-grandfather who's like, oh my god, my son, who has been missing for 30 years, isn't dead. I'm so happy. But, you became king, Sultan of something or other. You could have sent a letter home to your dad telling him, by the way, I'm not dead, and you never did. I get it when you're on the road and still fleeing for your life, but there is a point at which all of these kids who don't write home could have written home. Once you become king, you can send a messenger home to say, by the way, I'm not dead. Like, seriously, it's wild. But Scheherazade gets into discussing stories of generous people. And one of these stories of generous people, which has become one of my new favorite stories, because it's one of those stories that you read and you get through it and you just say, what? Is a story that begins with the statement that this particular man had died, and so his family buried him in a tomb at the top of a hill and put 2 statues of women with disheveled hair on either side of the door, which appear to only be there for the sake of easy identification and conversation. That is, so that when they are discussing this, the person can say, oh yeah, you know, that tomb with the 2 statues of women with disheveled hair by the door. Anyways, so he's been buried for a very brief time, and everybody starts to notice that whenever they spend the night near the tomb, that there is this horrific wailing and weeping and horrible sounds coming from there. And nobody's quite sure what it is, but also nobody really wants to go up there to investigate, which is frankly understandable. But anyways, somebody who is just passing through the country stops there for the night because it's a good place to stop for the night, and he hears this weeping and wailing and so on, and asks a local, what is that? He asks, I think he probably was their guide. And the guide explains, oh yeah, that's the thing with the tomb of the guy with the 2 women with disheveled hair in front of it. That's just noises that come from there. We're not really sure why. It's just a thing that happens. Don't worry about it. Just stay down here and don't go up there. And so this traveler says, oh sir, please offer us hospitality. And he's just sort of speaking to the universe. It's kind of a joke. And that night he wakes up from a dream and leaves his tent to find that his camel has been slaughtered. And not really sure how that happened. Everybody's a bit concerned, but at that point they butcher the camel and cook it because there's not much else they can do at that point besides butchering the camel and cooking it. It's dead. So they cook the camel and they eat it, and when they continue on the next day, they are met along their path by a young man leading a camel, and the young man says, hi, I'm the son of the dead guy in the tomb. So my father came to me in a dream, and he said that when you asked him for hospitality, he felt so bad that he couldn't give you anything, that he murdered your camel so that you would have food. Have a camel. And that's the story. And you listen to that, and you get out of it and you say, what? How is it hospitable? How is it hospitable to murder somebody's camel? Like, couldn't you have come to your son in a dream and just said, hey, can you offer them hospitality tomorrow to make up for the fact that I can't offer them hospitality tonight? And explain, this is my belated hospitality? Like, I don't... Instead, you murdered the camel, and then you make your son give them a camel, which is a kind of a waste of camels because they had food with them as they traveled, and you're not actually giving him hospitality because you haven't provided anything. You have just murdered his camel. You know, you get these stories that you listen to and you say, what? There's a story close to the end of this, which is about a young woman who, upon giving up her virginity to a black man, becomes a nymphomaniac. And her father gets kind of upset with this. But one day, one of the servants, for some reason, tells her that, you know what's really great sex? Baboons. And so she seduces a baboon. And a man comes across this and is kind of shocked by this young woman who is constantly having sex with a baboon, and he kills the baboon, which, I mean, is partly because he came across them, and baboons, like many great apes, can become exceedingly violent. That's why we still have a war in the Middle East, is because great apes can become exceedingly violent. And so he kills the baboon partly in self-defense and partly to save her, virtue such as it is, and tells her, no, it's, if you need that much sex, I will provide you that much sex, except he can't keep up with her sex drive because apparently she needs sex every hour on the hour or she just flails helplessly or something. I'm not entirely sure what the consequence is. But anyways, he can't keep up. So he visits an old wise woman who makes a magic steam thing, and then two worms fall out of her vagina, which were placed there by the black man and the baboon by having sex with her, and she turned into a woman with an ordinary sexual appetite, and then they were happily married. Also, an interesting end to these stories. We have a tradition in the West, of course, of the "and they lived happily ever after," and we have a slightly newer tradition of, happily ever after doesn't exist, life continues on and blah blah blah, and then things happen and nothing is perfect forever, and it's like, fine, undercut my happy ending. Many of these stories end with, "and they lived happily for the rest of their lives until God, the destroyer of happy things, came and they died." It's sort of, it's an interesting thing because it doesn't say, "and they lived out happily to the end of their days." It is, "and they lived happily until he who brings death and sadness to all came and took them away." And it's on the one hand, valid, because, arguably God does that too, but at the same time it feels unnecessary, and it feels like you sort of undercut your statement that "and they lived happily for the rest of their lives." So, the stories, they continue to be just passing strange. And it's part of it is part of the enjoyment of these, that you get these stories that you just wouldn't have thought of. And so, anyways, so that's the thing. The story actually does end with the story of the young woman and who slept with a baboon, and it, ends as always with a sort of a cliffhanger. But what's interesting is that this one doesn't end on the cliffhanger of Scheherazade ceased saying her permitted say. Instead, this just ends with, "and another tale they tell is that of ellipsis, end of Arabian Nights, Volume 4. And then we start in on those footnotes that I love so much. So, that's sort of the thing that I've sort of had to say about this one. And I think that's everything that I'm going to say on Volume 4. And in a bit, I'll finish Volume 5, and then we'll find out what jewels happen to be in that one. So, yeah, I have less than a minute on my timer, so that's everything, I think, and I will see you all next week.